Hey friends, let's talk about humidor maintenance. I feel like this is a super important conversation to have. And honestly, it's the difference between having a cigar that is wonderfully smokable and potentially having a cigar that is dry or too humid or the flavor is tainted. There are so many different things that could go wrong with your humidor. But to be honest, it's super simple. And I just kind of want to go over some do's and don'ts of like general humidor maintenance. So honestly, I'm going to start with what I think is the most important. And, this is just my opinion. You might think the most important thing is something else, but keep your cigars separated if they are flavored cigars and if they're traditional cigars. They're all living in one home. So if you have a flavored cigar next to a traditional cigar, over time, those flavors are going to kind of start to cross over, and your traditional cigar now could have some flavor notes of your flavored cigar. So it's just something we want to avoid. It's super easy, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but honestly, don't even just separate them by trays or by levels. Truly get a separate humidor. And kind of to kick this off as well, let's talk about the different types of humidors. Really, anything with a good seal can be used as a humidor. Typically, when we talk about humidors, we think of a more traditional humidor that's cedar lined, and that's important, but it's not necessary. So I actually have two converted winadors. One is cedar lined, one is not. They both function just fine. I have some various desktops as well as an old cabinet humidor. And then actually my overflow stuff I keep in an igloo cooler in my car with some Boveda packs. So really you can use anything with a decent seal, whether it be a cooler or a Rubbermaid container. Also, if you're looking to purchase an actual humidor, a good gauge is just test the resistance on the top of it. So if you lift the top off and there's absolutely no resistance, that's not necessarily going to be the best seal. So when you open it, you're going to want to feel a little bit of resistance. Also, you don't want to fight it. Make sure you get something that you can actually open. I would also caution you against freezing cigars unless you absolutely have no other option. It's not going to hurt them necessarily, but it's not the best way to store them. Again, if it's the only option, fine. It's better than letting them dry out, because once a cigar dries out, you can technically rehydrate it, but it's never going to be quite what it was like in its original state. So even though you can kind of revitalize cigars, I would caution you against letting them get that way in the first place. Let's see, some general housekeeping. When you have a humidor, whether it be a Rubbermaid or an igloo cooler or a traditional humidor or even like a travel humidor, try to keep them in a temperature regulated place. So don't keep them somewhere where it's going to get super hot. I usually try to not let mine exceed about 78 degrees. Also, don't keep them somewhere where they're going to dry out very fast. So I live in Wisconsin. The Midwest gets very cold in the winter. You don't want to leave your humidor near a heating vent where the air is typically drier. You also don't want to put it in a place where the air is typically super humid, like, a damp basement or something. Try to the best of your ability to keep it in an area where it's going to be a little bit more regulated. Obviously, there's only so much we can do. We can't control the weather, but we can control where that humidor is stored. Let's see. In addition to that, when we talk about the humidity, for me, the sweet spot is about 68 to 72 degrees or 72% humidity. Anything above 72, I know Boveda makes packs up to like 75. You'll see the 84%, and those are good for seasoning. But anything above 75 can be a little too humid, and you're actually going to have a hard time keeping those cigars lit. So if you're not using Boveda packs, which are great because they're kind of a two-way humidity regulator, if it's not humid enough, it will release. And if it's too humid, it will actually absorb. But you definitely need a hygrometer. Now, analog hygrometers look super cool, fancy, nice, they blend in. I don't personally find them to be super accurate. Look at that, I've already been talking too much. I recommend an analog hygrometer, a digital hygrometer for sure. The digital hygrometer is going to be far more accurate, and you can get some really fancy ones that will actually like broadcast to your phone. So if you really want to regulate the humidity levels and the temperature, if you go on vacation or something and you know the weather is going to be like crazy cold or crazy humid, you can actually view it from your phone and adjust. Now, I don't have anything that fancy, but it does exist, and I personally think it's very cool. So now, if you're gonna age a cigar, I definitely recommend aging it at a lower humidity percentage. So aging, I would say between 62 to 65% humidity. But for general smokables, I tend to keep them at about 70 to 72%. Now, I also don't notice that much of a difference between that kind of like 68 to 72. You may, and that's great. But kind of outside of that, if you're deviating beyond that sort of sweet spot, you'll start to notice it be a little too dry or maybe a little bit too humid. And both are a problem. Obviously, if it's too dry, it makes sense. It's going to crack, it can unravel. The taste can be a little skewed, but it's also a problem if it's too humid. Not only does it not smoke well, it doesn't stay lit, but it can actually dilute the flavor. So if you think about like your favorite scotch and you put too much ice in there, too much water, and it starts to dilute it. If your cigar is too humid, it can actually have a similar occurrence. So just be mindful of that. If you're not an everyday smoker, if you're not checking your humidors on a daily basis, I would definitely recommend checking them on a monthly basis for sure. Like I said, the Boveda packs are a good option. Otherwise, you can use the beads. So they come in like a disc form that you can affix towards the top or the side of your humidor. You can get jars. Humidor Care is an option. You can get like Zycar, the Boveda packs, and you can use propylene glycol for that, which is completely safe, or distilled water. If you don't have access to any of that stuff or you need something in a pinch, a hack would be to get that garden foam. So it's the green foam. You can find it at Michael's or like a craft store. You can probably even get it at Walmart, and soak that in distilled water. And you can put that in your humidor, and that will help with the humidity levels. And on that note though, you want to make sure that none of the liquid, whether it be distilled water or propylene glycol, is ever touching your cigars. So if you're going to do the, the garden foam hack, just make sure your cigars aren't touching it. And make sure that if you're doing the beads with either the water or the propylene glycol, if it's affixed to the top of your humidor and it's going to be above your cigars, make sure you leave it upside down on a paper towel or a rag for a couple of minutes just to make sure any of that excess liquid is going to drip out, because again, you don't want it dripping all over the cigars. It's just not good for them. So let's see, seasoning your humidor, also very, very important. I mean, it's legitimately an integral part of getting your humidor to where it needs to be. So kind of the analogy I always use for that is if you are making something in the oven, right? You're baking a pie or making a pizza, and you don't let your oven preheat. It's going to take longer to get up to temperature. In addition, you risk having it heat inconsistently or just a little bit odd. And that's actually the same thing that can happen with your humidor. So you absolutely 100% do not want to skip the seasoning process. Now, there are a couple different ways you can season your humidor, kind of circling back to the Boveda packs. You can get the 84%, drop it in there for about a week to 10 days, and then just take it out and you're good to go. You can buy humidor wipes, which are actually meant specifically to season the humidor and wipe it down. And I believe that's like a once or twice a day sort of occurrence for a couple of days, getting it up to temperature, or rather up to humidity. And more of a basic sort of everyday method is you can simply wipe it down with distilled water and just a rag or a paper towel. And when doing that, I would do it maybe twice a day for about a week. You want to make sure that the cedar is nice and saturated with it. Obviously, you don't want any excess liquid dropping down into the base of your humidor. And if you're going to go that method, because it's a little bit more inconsistent, I definitely would recommend a hygrometer right away to make sure that it's going to be up to the proper humidity level before entrusting it to house your cigars. Because again, The humidor is an integral piece of technology to make sure that you are getting the utmost smoking experience. So make sure that you are properly caring for it. And with the propylene glycol or the distilled water with the beads, typically that maintenance is about every 2 months. The Boveda packs are typically 2 to 3 months, and you'll know when those are done because they will get crusty and hard. Don't try to rehydrate them. They're not that much money. Just go buy a new one. Same with the beads. Those have a shelf life. You'll get a couple of years out of them, and once they start not absorbing the water or the propylene glycol as much, you'll start to notice they don't completely fill the jar or the holder that they're in. Once you see them start to shrink and not quite puff up to their once full potential, it's time to replace them. Again, it's very seldom that you have to do so, and it does make a big difference. So as far as keeping cigars in your humidor, we get the question a lot, should you keep them in the cellophane? Should you not keep them in the cellophane? So the cellophane is actually there to not only protect the cigars, but it does help them breathe. So if you are keeping a humidor of sort of everyday smokables and you're putting it in a travel humidor or your pocket or your car or whatever to transport them to go smoke somewhere else, I definitely recommend leaving them in the cellophane because, like I said, it helps kind of keep them breathing, and it also protects them within your humidor and the transport process. However, if you are going to be aging your cigars for any length of time, really over, I would say 6 months, take them out of the cellophane, because once you have them aging for quite some time, you're losing the benefits of aging that cigar by leaving the cellophane on. The cellophane is going to become yellowed and crinkly, and it will show the age, but you're losing some of the benefits of that age because it's all sort of being concentrated on that cellophane. So just make sure that if you want to age the cigar to achieve a certain flavor, a mellowness, letting those flavors marry a little bit more, just make sure you take the cellophane off. It helps. It's not necessary, but if you're looking to achieve what aging a cigar can do, I would recommend taking the cellophane off. So now let's talk about cellophane on boxes. Always take them off. You can 100% leave those cigars in the box to age in your humidor, but if you leave that cellophane on the box, you're restricting the humidity getting in there. If you're leaving it in there for, a couple of weeks or, even a month or so, it's fine. But if you're going to keep them in there, like for me, when I have a box of cigars, I don't necessarily smoke that box of cigars all in 1 week, 1 month, even 1 year. So if you're going to keep it in there for any length of time, I definitely recommend taking that cellophane off the box, because it is going to help those cigars have access to the humidity that your humidor is providing. So let's see here, make sure I have everything. Oh, so if you're checking the humidity of a cigar, I see this not only for personal care, like at-home humidors, but also in cigar shops. So the place on a cigar that you want to check to see if the humidity levels are good is at the foot. And now you want to be careful not to squeeze it terribly hard, because you can risk cracking the foot. You can smoke through a foot crack, but it's not ideal. You don't want to risk it, right? So when you squeeze a cigar, now I've already lit this one and it's already gone out because clearly I've been talking too much, but you want a little bit of a spongy resistance. You don't want to feel a cigar and have it obviously be hard as a rock, but you also don't want to feel a cigar and have it be just super like malleable and squishy. You want sort of just a little bit of resistance. You can see my fingers kind of squeezing in, but there's no cracking, there's no splitting. You just get a little bit of that spongy resistance, and that's the ideal place for a cigar to be as far as humidity levels go if you don't have a hygrometer and you're kind of just trying to pull a cigar out and see if it's ready to go. If you hear the cracking, if you see the splitting, it's too dry, I would not recommend smoking it. And if you grab a cigar and you're squeezing it and it's super spongy, honestly, leave it out of the humidor for a couple of days and kind of check back on it. You want to make sure that it's not going to get too dry, but you also want to make sure that you're getting some of that humidity out there to give you the best possible smoking experience. Also, plume versus mold. Now, this is a little bit of a touchy subject because people have their opinions, and that's fine. I also have my opinion. Plume is fine, mold is not. Mold is going to have more of a green color, you know, very indicative of what mold looks like, right? So, mold is not good. I would not recommend smoking the cigar if it has mold on it, and mold does occur from a humidor just being overly humidified, too moist, not enough airflow. And in that note, don't overfill your humidors. I just want to sidebar really quickly here. Not overfilling your humidors is important. So for example, I have a Macanudo Inspirato humidor that holds 150 cigars, right? I could cram 200 cigars into that humidor. However, it's not good to do because the humidors need a certain amount of room for the humidity to circulate and for the cigars to breathe. You can cram all you want into that humidor, but you're not doing the cigars any favors. So again, kind of going back to this cooking reference here, if you're making, let's say, I don't know, potatoes, roasted potatoes, right? Good example. And you're putting them on a baking sheet. If you are just overloading the potatoes on that baking sheet, they're not gonna cook evenly because they need room to expand and to breathe and to just kind of have their own little personal space, right? You don't like your personal space invaded. I don't like my personal space invaded. The cigars also want their personal space. So just don't overpack your humidor. Just because it says 150 and you can fit 200 in there doesn't mean you should put 200 in there. Just buy another humidor. I'm sure you can find cigars to stock it. So let's go back to this plume versus mold thing, okay? Mold, not good, don't smoke them. Mold, green, has a little smell to it. It's gonna leave sort of like a film on your fingers. I mean, I'm sure you all know what mold looks like. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just don't do it. Just don't smoke it. Again, that just comes from being overly humidified. Just try not to let it exceed 75. I mean, sometimes it'll dip or, exceed based on the weather outside, for a couple days of it being a little too humid. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to kill your cigars, right? Just try to be mindful of it. But plume is fine. So plume, you will not only find, maybe in your humidor, but you also actually see it out and about at cigar lounges. So plume is more of a sort of white, almost powdery coating on the wrapper of the cigar. And that's basically your cigar telling you that it is ready to be smoked. You've got it's the sugars and the sort of chemical reaction happening in the tobacco that it rises to the surface, and you can just brush it off nicely with your finger, but it's not necessarily necessary. So if you see that sort of white, very thin sort of powder coating, dusting on your cigar, that is absolutely nothing to be worried about. It is simply just what happens sometimes when a cigar has aged to the point where it's just hey, smoke me. Another thing, tobacco beetles, not good. If you see a cigar and it has tiny little holes in it, I don't have anything to show you an example of, thankfully, but honestly, if you've never seen it, it's probably worth Googling just so you know what it looks like, because you can see some imperfections in cigars that could maybe resemble a tobacco beetle hole, but they're pretty distinct. So I would just look up a picture and sort of familiarize yourself with it, so if it ever occurs down the line, you kind of know what to look for. But basically, they're very precise looking pinpricks on your cigar. Now, tobacco beetles aren't too much of a problem. I mean, it's an agricultural product, right? Bugs live on plants. However, most manufacturers, including us, put our cigars into a deep freeze for about 72 hours. And so that deep freeze makes sure that any eggs that may be present on the tobacco are killed, and then you don't get beetles. Sometimes, however, if cigars do not go through that process, you can risk getting beetles down the line. I've seen people put cigars in their freezer to kill the beetles if they have an infestation. It is up to you. I, in my professional opinion, would not recommend smoking a cigar that has had a beetle, that has beetle marks in it. Maybe it's just a hygiene thing, but I would not recommend it. And if you see that, if you see those holes, immediately take everything out of that humidor that has been exposed to that cigar with the beetles, because they are terrible little buggers and they will infest all of the cigars. So you just want to make sure that you find sort of the source of this problem and remove everything else from that area, because you want to make sure that nothing else is going to get infected. And should that be the case, make sure you wipe down your humidor nicely. You clean it, air it out, make sure that you're getting any residue and excess moisture out of there. At that point, if you ever see beetles in your humidor, you absolutely want to take every precaution possible, because you don't want any eggs, super tiny, can't exactly see them. You don't want anything else living in your humidor where this is going to become a problem in the future. So make sure you empty everything out, clean it really, really, really diligently, and monitor the other cigars that were in there to make sure that they are not exposed to it. Give it a couple days, and make sure that you're doing everything you can to alleviate the problem. Let's see here. I just want to make sure that we have covered everything. All right, so the only other thing that I want to add is, when you're storing your humidor, we've talked about not storing it in an overly dry place or an overly humid place. If you do have a glass top humidor, don't store it in direct sunlight. This probably sounds silly because I'm sure not a lot of people are keeping their humidors in direct sunlight, but it is definitely worth noting, because if I don't tell you and it happens, then I'm going to feel guilty, right? So by putting your cigars in direct sunlight, if you are in your car and you have a couple cigars in there for a few days in the sunlight, it's not going to kill them, but I wouldn't recommend, more than a couple of days. The sunlight will bleach the leaves, and it's not good for the tobacco to be just in any sort of excess amount exposed to the direct sunlight. So if you are housing a glass top humidor and you have cigars, just don't keep it on your windowsill to show off to your friends. Put it in a nice sort of cool, dark corner where it's not going to get direct sunlight. Also, we talked about the propylene glycol and the distilled water for both maintaining the beads as well as seasoning your humidor. But it is worth noting that if you're not going to use propylene glycol, make sure you are using distilled water, because if you're using just regular tap water or non-distilled water, it's going to leave a film and it's actually not as effective. So it's just, making sure that you're giving your humidor the attention that it needs and giving it, high quality products that are going to keep it running well. It's going to make your life easier. It's going to make your cigars smoke better. It's really it's a very simple thing to maintain. It's just knowing what to do. So let's quickly recap here. Make sure you always season your humidor. Always, always, always. Seriously, you guys, frickin' season your humidors. It takes about a week. That's the only commitment, right? Season your humidors. Watch out for beetles. Again, it's not super prevalent, but if it happens, keep them separated. Clean that stuff down. Clean it down, separate your cigars. Don't keep them in direct sunlight. Do not keep traditional cigars and flavored cigars in the same home. They will transfer flavors. The traditional cigars likely won't be affected as much because they already have the natural tobaccos in there, but your Macanudo Green will definitely taste like a Macanudo M coffee should you store them next to each other for any length of time. Oh, what else did we talk about? Keep them in the cellophane. It's just best for the protection. Keep them in the cellophane if you are just kind of using them as everyday smokables. Take them out of the cellophane if you're going to age them. And as far as a time limit on aging, there isn't really one. A well-maintained and properly cared for humidor, you can age cigars literally forever. There's a point where the cigars can overage, probably in a sense where you're just not getting maybe the flavor or the body you're looking for. Certain cigars I like with 1 year or 2 years of age, certain cigars I like with 5 years of age. I have cigars that have been aging now for about 12 years. So it's just a matter of personal preference. And, as a helpful hint, we've talked about this in videos past, but if you ever buy a box of cigars and you feel like they're green or fresh and they have a little bit of that bite to them, you sort of get that cigar hangover, which is what I describe as, headachy, a little nauseous, maybe, scratchy throat, like it's bitey, but it's not spicy. So that could be a presence of ammonia. So if the cigars have been through a rushed fermentation process or not aged long enough prior to hitting the market, that presence of ammonia can kind of give you all of those sort of issues, headache, scratchy throat, just not feeling well, right? Anyway, if you experience that, throw your cigars in the humidor for, a couple of months, and that ammonia will continue to sort of age out of those cigars, and then they will be perfectly well to smoke down the line. You don't need that much time. I mean, a couple of months is pretty gracious. So just check them, smoke another one. If it feels better, great. If it doesn't, leave them in there a little bit longer. You really, like I said, you can overage cigars if you're trying to achieve a particular flavor, but again, a properly maintained and cared for humidor, you can keep cigars forever. Try to avoid freezing cigars if possible. You can do a lot of makeshift humidors. Again, cedar is not absolutely necessary, but it helps both in the and sort of like the insulation and keeping the humidity in, and also the smell and the flavor. Spanish cedar, you really can't beat that. But yeah, all right. Well, I hope this video was helpful. I'm sorry that was long-winded. If you have any tips or tricks that you use to maintain your humidors, or if there's something that I have forgotten, please put it in the comments section. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful. And as always, stay safe, stay smoky, and I will talk to you guys later.